My mobile miter saw station has served me very well over the last few years, but it definitely has its weaknesses. There's some parts that are broke now, like these legs. They don't really lock in anymore, so I have to set it up on an incline to make sure it doesn't fall over. There's the fact that it's never really set up when I want it to be, so I gotta spend time setting it up if I want to make even a single cut with it. And it's fairly limited on its capacity, which makes it harder to cut longer stock, as well as introduces a quality issue to the cuts. So for the sake of efficiency gains, quality gains, and my own sanity, I think it's time I make a permanent miter saw station. So for this miter saw station, it'll be made entirely out of 2x4s and 3/4 inch plywood for the top. So I started off by cutting all the different lengths that I would need for the frame out of the 2x4s. And then, as I normally do when working with 2x4s, I went ahead and ripped all the shoulders off to make nice square boards to be able to work with. Alright, so now that I got most of the framing materials ready, I'm ready to build the actual bench, but let me give you an idea of what I'm working with. So I'm here in the bay that has my table saw in my shop, and where we're going is over here to this other bay, and we're going to work along this wall underneath these cabinets. So let me go over there and show you what we got. Alright, so over here we have this wall with these cabinets. We have all of these outlets that I want to keep accessible, and then we have the ground here. Now, if you look at the ground in that center block wall, that is definitely not level. The top of the center block wall is level, the floor is not. So what that means is I have to make all the legs for the length of this to be different lengths. So I've laid out my pieces for the 3 different sections here. Let me show you. So this 30-inch piece is going to be the center where the miter saw is actually installed. I have a line I drew on this wall that is centered between this opening. And that board's going to go right there. We have a 5-foot section that's going to be going off to the right, and then a large 8-foot section that's going off to the left. The 8-foot section is going to have legs on both ends and in the middle, and the 5-foot section is going to have a leg on each end. So I need to figure out what the length of all these legs need to be. So now that I have the height from the ground to some reference point on that wall for where every leg's gonna go, I know that this leg on the very end I want to be the full length that I've already cut. So I want all of these legs to be cut shorter with reference to this. So I'm gonna calculate a delta for all of these legs with reference to that. So I had originally accounted for the slope along the wall, but I didn't account for the slope away from the wall. So I just did that by using a 2-foot level, and since that's how wide my bench is going to be. So basically this leg is about 1 inch longer than this leg. So now that I had all the dimensions, it was finally time to start building the frame. So right here I should probably point out a design modification I made. I spent all that time calculating the individual length of every single leg, but ultimately I wound up using this ledge at the top of the center block wall for the foundation for the rear legs rather than the actual floor. So I was able to cut all these pieces the exact same length. Also, it took a few iterations on cutting the lengths of these legs even after doing the math to finally get it perfectly level, but once it was very, very satisfying. Alright, here's a quick tip for you. If you have a board that's too long or oriented the wrong way to be able to clamp to a surface before you screw it down, you can always use the clamps to make a artificial surface to actually rest the board on. Then go ahead and screw it in place, and then you can remove your clamps like I did here. I was able to cut the 3 pieces for the working surface all out of one sheet of 3/4 inch maple plywood, and once I had all the pieces cut out, I just glued them down and clamped them. And let me take this moment to say, if you're the spouse or a significant other of a woodworker, there is no such thing as too many clamps. Period. End of discussion. So now it was finally time to mount the miter saw. So I started off by planing down some pieces of wood to use as shims or blocks to help elevate the miter saw so that its working surface was level with the working surface that I had just built. Then, to ensure that the miter saw fence was parallel with the front edge of the working surface, I just used a long straight piece of wood, bumped it up flush to the fence, and took some measurements along the front edge of the working surface, adjusting the miter saw as needed. So to anchor the miter saw in place, I first put screws through just the shims into the working surface, which is what I'm doing, putting these screws through the big holes here. And then I put screws through the smaller holes that actually hold the miter saw onto the shims. I did this in case I ever want to take the miter saw off of this station. The shims will stay exactly in place and I don't have to worry about them getting misaligned, and then whenever I remount the miter saw, it actually not being level with the working surface. Alright, so after I took that last shot, I left the shop for the night, and now I'm back out here a few days later, and I realize I've run into one kind of big problem. So when I originally made the design for this station, it was actually for a different miter saw, and I got a new miter saw instead, and it still fit this section that the miter saw was going to go in, but I didn't actually look at the beveling of the miter saw itself. And so now I realize that when I bevel this down, if I were to actually build out the dust collection hood, it would actually have to sit up on this tabletop now, not against the side of this like I had originally planned. So it's not a huge deal, I could do that, except it would have to be out here on this edge, and I would actually interfere with this outlet. I don't really want to interfere with that outlet, so I think I'm just going to forego the dust hood, and instead I'll basically just block off these sides and the back so that there's like a little compartment made here that will hold most of the dust and not let it fall down underneath the station itself. But if it becomes a really big issue and I have dust still going everywhere, then I'll just make one up here and it won't be a big deal. I can relocate this outlet if needed. We're going to run this saw through its maiden cut. Alright, so these turned out really good. They're nice and smooth with the tabletop. But what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to wind up putting a chamfer on these edges anyway. That way, as I'm sliding a board from the miter saw over to the tabletop, it won't hang up on that sharp edge just in case it's off slightly. last major part before finish could be applied was installing the T-track system for stop blocks as well as a measuring strip. I wanted the T-track to be 9 inches from the front edge of the working surface, so I started off by breaking down some scrap OSB that I had into 9-inch strips and then used that as a template to mark on top of the surface where I wanted that T-track to be. I then got my router set up to cut a groove the depth of the T-track, and then I repositioned the OSB to actually use it as a guide for the router in order to cut perfect straight lines on the edges of that groove. It actually wound up taking me 4 passes on each side to complete this channel. I wound up only doing half the depth rather than the full depth to help prevent any tear out. So 2 passes for the depth, and then it took me 2 passes to get the full width. Installing the T-track was pretty straightforward. Since it's aluminum, I was able to cut the pieces to length using the miter saw. I then marked holes to be drilled at the drill press about every foot, drilled those holes, made sure they were able to countersink the screws, and then put a pilot hole into the wood where those holes were in the T-track, and then anchored it down. The dust collection system uses a dedicated shop vac and a dust cyclone. It's split into 2 ports, one that's for the miter saw and the other that's kind of an auxiliary port that can be used for anything else. I also utilize a power tool relay to automatically turn on the shop vac anytime I turn on the miter saw. Unplug this, plug it in here. So to install the measuring tape, I cut a piece of wood to a known length, which for me was 17 inches. And then I locked the blade down. I put that piece of wood right up against the blade, marked that on the T-track, and then I lined up the 17-inch mark on the tape with that line, and then went ahead and adhered it from there. The last thing to do for this project was to get some finish on the working surface. I probably should have just gone ahead and pulled up the T-track and then finished it, but I decided to go ahead and tape it off. It worked fine, it was just probably more work than it was worth. The finish I used was Minwax's Poly Shades, which is a stain plus a poly in one finish. I was a little dubious that this was going to work well, and after the first coat I was really worried. However, just follow the instructions, definitely do 2 coats. That second coat was amazing. This finish is perfect. It is nice, resistant to anything that spills on it, easy cleanup, and it looks very good. So I'm filming this clip about 2 months after I finished the construction of this project, and I'm doing that because I wanted to give you my opinion of it now that I've had a chance to use it a little bit. Overall, wonderful addition to the shop. It has improved my efficiency and improved my quality having this set up and ready to go. Just having the miter saw set up and ready to go at a moment's notice has made it more inviting to come into the shop and actually get something done around the house. Normally, whenever I had just the mobile miter saw station, it was, I need a single board cut to a certain length. Well, I gotta go set up the mobile miter saw station. That's gonna take some time. Might as well just do this cut whenever I have something else to do. Now that it's set up and ready to go, come out here, get your cut done, and go about your life. Having the stop block system and the measuring tape built in also improved quality greatly. If I need 30 inches, 5 boards at 30 inches, set your stop block, get your 5 boards, and they are the exact same length, no doubt about it. The only thing I would have done differently is change the width of the frame. I had originally planned on leaving a 2-inch overhang on the tabletop, but due to a modification I made in the middle of the build, I wound up only leaving a 1/2-inch overhang. That's not a big issue other than the fact that I wanted to leave the 2-inch overhang in case I wanted to clamp something to the surface. So if I only had the tabletop I had to clamp to, I could use a more narrow clamp. But now that I have to clamp to the frame as well, that adds about 3 more inches of clamp throat that you would need in order to clamp. The only things I'm going to add to this later is on this end, which has more clearance to the floor because of this wicked slope of the concrete. I'll wind up adding a rollable cart that can go underneath the table and it can house my router table. And then on this end, I will actually put some drawers and some cabinets down below to just add some extra storage space to the shop. If you like this project, click the like button, go to my channel, check out the other videos that I got, and until next time, take a chance and build something.